My name is Isabella Ward, and the first thing I remember after hitting the marble was the sound of my own breath leaving me. It wasn't a scream. It was a hollow gasp that echoed through the hallway of my father's mansion, bouncing off chandeliers and polished portraits of people who looked powerful but never kind. The chandelier above me flickered the gold light, trembling as if it too was afraid of him. My ribs burned a sharp ache blooming beneath my lungs. I could taste blood and perfume together, the scent of my mother's evening roses mixing with iron. My father's voice came next. Calm, controlled. The same tone he used when he closed business deals worth millions. "You brought this on yourself, Isabella," he said. I tried to lift my head, but pain shot through my spine like lightning. He stood a few steps above me, his hand still clenched as if the act of pushing me had frozen time around his fingers. My mother Margaret appeared behind him in her silk robe. "Richard," she whispered the cameras. He looked up instinctively. The small red light blinked in the corner of the ceiling, steady, quiet, alive. "It doesn't matter," he said. "She'll never use it." His certainty was a knife. He turned his gaze down to me. "You could have had everything, but you had to say no." His words pressed heavier than the pain in my ribs. I tried to speak, but all I managed was a rasp, the sound of something breaking inside. "You can't own me anymore," I said. The sentence was barely a whisper, but it cut through the air like glass. For a moment, his face twisted not in guilt, but in disbelief, like he couldn't understand that I still had a voice. Margaret knelt beside me, her hand hovering but never touching. "You need to be quiet now," she murmured almost tenderly. "This is a family matter." The irony made me want to laugh. A family matter. That phrase had always been her shield against truth, her way to erase bruises and silence questions. My vision blurred, the chandelier above dissolving into gold streaks. Somewhere in the distance, I heard Charles, my brother, shouting, his footsteps clumsy and slurred. "Dad, stop! She's bleeding!" But Richard's voice cut him off. "Go back inside." His shadow moved over me, blocking the last light. "You'll sign when you can walk again," he said. And then he walked away. I lay there listening to his footsteps fade, replaced by the faint hum of the security camera still recording. Every second that red light blinked like a heartbeat, steady and relentless. Somewhere inside the system, a file was uploading Walter's failsafe, the one I had installed weeks ago when I stopped believing in family protection. My vision dimmed, but one thought remained clear: the video was safe. The truth was alive, and so was I. When people speak of the Ward family, they use words like legacy empire and class. They imagine charity galas, marble foyers, and smiling portraits in glossy Richmond magazines. But inside that house, legacy was a leash. Every chandelier, every imported vase, every embroidered monogram carried one message: belong, obey, or disappear. My father, Richard Ward, built his empire the same way he built his family, with fear polished into discipline. He never raised his voice because silence made people lean in closer. Control was his language. When I was little, I used to watch him negotiate deals from the top of the staircase, my small hands gripping the railing, memorizing the stillness in his body. He would pause just long enough for the other person to fill the quiet with surrender. Later, I learned that's how power really works, not by shouting, but by making everyone else afraid of the echo. My mother Margaret was his mirror. Her voice could soothe while it suffocated. "Family means loyalty," she used to say, tracing the rim of her teacup with manicured nails. "Loyalty means doing what's best for the group." In her mouth, the group always meant him. I grew up believing love was obedience, that safety meant silence, that every decision required permission. My brother Charles Jr. was the heir, the golden son, with a whiskey laugh and a trust fund waiting like a promise. He could wreck a car, lose a fortune, and still be met with soft forgiveness. "Boys make mistakes," my mother would sigh. When I brought home a scholarship letter from college, she smiled politely and said, "Don't gloat, darling. Ambition can look ungraceful on a woman." Every compliment had a leash hidden inside. For years, I let them hold it. I smiled at dinners, nodded at lectures, folded my voice to fit their script. Until Daniel came along. He wasn't rich. He didn't come from a family name carved into courthouse plaques. He was a structural engineer, steady, quiet, the kind of man who fixed things with patience, not power. The first time he came to dinner, he wore a plain navy suit. My father didn't look at him once. My mother did, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. An engineer, she said later as if it were a diagnosis. You deserve someone more established. I remember laughing softly. You mean someone easier to control? She didn't reply. She didn't need to. A week later, I received an invitation to a family meeting. No context, no warmth, just the family crest embossed in gold. Inside the study, my father sat behind his oak desk, hands folded like a priest at confession. You're marrying him, he said. No question mark. Yes, I replied. His eyes didn't flicker. Then you'll sign the family continuity agreement. It protects our holdings, yours included. My pulse stuttered. You mean it controls them? His jaw flexed, but his tone stayed even. It keeps you safe. It keeps all of us safe. I looked at my mother. She smiled faintly approval and warning blended together. Isabella, your father knows best. That sentence followed me my entire life, branded into every decision. But something inside me shifted that night. Maybe it was Daniel's voice in my head reminding me that strength doesn't have to be loud. Maybe it was the way the chandelier above us flickered again, same as it did the night he pushed me. I realized then control only works if you mistake it for care. That was the night I stopped mistaking anything. 2 weeks later, I walked into my father's office with my pulse steady and palms dry. It was the same room where every family decision had been made since before I was born, mahogany desk, gold-framed diplomas, a fireplace always burning even in Virginia's summer heat. On the desk lay a leather folder embossed with the ward crest. Inside it, a document waited like a loaded gun. The family deal, my father said, voice smooth as glass. A one-time transfer of $2 million to your joint account, a gift for your future if you sign. My mother stood near the window, her reflection perfectly aligned with his in the glass. Her pearls gleamed like teeth. It's a legacy gesture, she added. We did the same for Charles when he started his business. You mean the business you rescued 6 times, I said quietly. Her smile froze, delicate but sharp. You've always been emotional, Isabella. That word again, emotional, their polite way of saying defiant. I opened the folder. The contract wasn't a gift, it was a cage. Signing it meant merging all personal and marital assets into the Ward Trust managed by my father for preservation and continuity. In other words, he would own every dollar I earned, every house I bought, every breath I took. You really think I'd agree to this? I asked. My father leaned back, studying me like a project. You've benefited from my name your whole life. This is how we maintain order. Order, I repeated. You mean control. His eyes hardened. I mean family. He rose slowly, the air shifting with him. Without this, you cut yourself off. No inheritance, no safety net. He said it as if I were a reckless child refusing a seatbelt, not a grown woman choosing freedom. Then I'll build my own net, I said. My mother sighed. Darling, independence is charming until it ruins you. My laugh came out smaller than I wanted. I think what ruins me is pretending obedience is love. That made my father still. For a heartbeat, silence thickened the room. Then he stepped forward, lowering his voice to the same tone he used when closing a $1 million deal. You'll sign before the wedding, Isabella. You owe it to this family. I don't owe you my life, I said. You gave me a last name, not a future. His jaw tightened, but he didn't raise his hand. Not yet. Think carefully. Refusal has consequences. So does coercion, I replied and shut the folder. His eyes flicked to the ceiling camera, and for the first time I saw uncertainty there. He didn't know that Walter, my friend from college now working in cybersecurity, had rewired the entire system weeks earlier. The footage wasn't going to his cloud server, it was going to mine. I left the office without another word, my heels echoing through the hall like gunfire. In the reflection of the glass doors, I saw my mother watching me, her lips pressed into a faint, frightened smile. She wasn't afraid for me. She was afraid of what I had just broken. That night, Daniel found me on the porch, sitting in the dark. I told him everything from the contract to the threat. He didn't interrupt, just held my hand until I finished. Then he said softly, "If they want a legacy, give them one. A different kind." The words settled deep in my chest. I realized then that legacy didn't mean blood or money. It meant courage recorded, and this time the camera was already rolling. The days that followed were quiet in a way that felt staged. My father didn't confront me again, but the silence around the house grew sharp as crystal. My mother filled the air with her usual rehearsed grace, the sound of teacups and polite conversation that disguised everything she refused to say. She didn't yell, she didn't have to. Her disappointment was a constant hum, steady and suffocating. Each morning, she would knock softly on my bedroom door and leave a tray breakfast served like peace offerings. But there was always a note. "You're letting anger cloud your judgment. You've embarrassed your father. He's only trying to protect you." They were written in her elegant cursive suite, on the surface venom underneath. I began to see what I hadn't seen before. Gaslighting wasn't about yelling. It was about rewriting memory until you questioned your own sanity. At dinner, she'd mentioned the deal as if it were something I had misunderstood. "You know, darling, it was never meant to trap you. You always overthink things." My father would nod slowly, never looking up from his plate, the gesture of a man too dignified to engage with hysteria. Even Charles joined in. "You're making this worse than it is, Izzy," he said one night, slurring slightly, bourbon glass in hand. "Dad's just doing what's smart. It's not like he's your enemy. He pushed me once because I refused him." I said, my voice low but steady. He laughed. "You slipped. Everyone saw it." I froze. He hadn't been there. He was in another wing of the house that night, but now he claimed to remember it differently. That was how they worked. They rewrote the story until you started wondering if your own pain was fiction. Daniel started noticing the changes first. My phone calls with him were shorter because my father had the house lines monitored. Emails mysteriously disappeared. Once I caught the faint reflection of someone standing outside my bedroom window, Charles, or maybe one of the house staff. I couldn't tell. When I mentioned it to my mother, she sighed. "You've been under stress. You imagine things." One afternoon, I tried to leave for work, only to find my car keys missing. My mother appeared at the doorway, serene as ever. "Stay home, darling. You're not well." "Not well," I said, "because I won't sign your contract." Her smile didn't falter. "Because you're hurting yourself." I realized then that control didn't always look like violence. Sometimes it looked like concern. That evening, Daniel came to pick me up without calling first. My father met him at the gate, voice calm, firm, final. "My daughter won't be going anywhere tonight." Daniel's expression stayed composed, but I saw his hand clench at his side. "That's her decision," he said. "Not anymore," my father replied. Daniel's jaw tightened. "You can't imprison her." My father's lips curved in that faint smile he used in interviews. "No one's imprisoned. She's simply home where she belongs." I watched from the window as Daniel stood there unmoving until my father turned and walked back toward the house. The next morning, the staff avoided my eyes. My phone was gone. The internet password had been changed. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the blinking light on the ceiling camera. I whispered, "Still recording." It blinked once, steady. Somewhere inside that blinking light, I found the smallest thread of hope. If they wanted to trap me, they'd forgotten something. Truth always leaves evidence. By the end of that week, my mother announced a family dinner. Her tone was gentle, almost affectionate, but I felt the trap before she set the table. The invitations weren't written, but orders never were in our house. I dressed simply, navy dress hair pulled back, no jewelry, and walked downstairs to find the dining room transformed into a stage. Crystal glasses caught the chandelier's light like eyes watching for mistakes. My father sat at the head of the table, posture perfect, tie dark as judgment. Charles sat to his right, already nursing his drink. My mother moved gracefully between chairs, directing servants with quiet authority. "A special dinner," she said, smiling at me. "To remind us what family means." Those words should have been comfort. Instead, they felt like a warning. I sat across from Charles. The smell of roasted duck and truffle filled the air, rich and oppressive. Small talk floated like mist, business updates, stock values, charity luncheons, but every sentence curved toward me. "You've been distant, Isabella," my father said, finally setting down his knife. "We worry about you." My mother nodded, her pearls catching the light. "You used to be so graceful, so obedient. Lately you've become argumentative." "Independent," I corrected. My mother's lips twitched. "Stubbornness disguised as independence is still stubbornness." My father folded his hands. "This rebellion of yours, turning Daniel against us, refusing the family deal, hurts everyone." "Refusing control isn't rebellion," I said softly. "It's survival." Charles chuckled, raising his glass. "You're acting like you're in some movie, Izzy. You think this is oppression? Try growing up with Dad's expectations. He just wants to protect the family name." My pulse quickened, but I smiled faintly. "He wants to own it, not protect it." Charles leaned forward, his face flushed from bourbon. "You should be grateful. $2 million for signing a few papers. Anyone else would kill for that." "Apparently that's true," I said. The words slipped out sharper than I intended. My father's gaze cut through me, cold and patient. My mother's smile didn't move. The next moment unfolded like choreography. She lifted her glass, her voice calm. "To the wards. To unity." Everyone echoed except me. My silence filled the space louder than a scream. My father set his glass down slowly. "You will sign, Isabella," he said, "before this family becomes the subject of gossip." I looked at him evenly. "Then maybe they'll finally hear the truth." A long pause. Then laughter, quiet, condescending. "Truth," he said. "You think anyone would believe your version of it? Emotional, impulsive, manipulated by a man who wants our money." The words hit like open palms. My throat tightened, but I didn't look away. "Daniel doesn't need your money. He has integrity. That's something you can't buy." For a fraction of a second, my father's mask cracked and something raw slipped through anger or maybe fear. My mother intervened quickly, her voice the silk covering steel. "Enough! This is a family table, not a courtroom." I set my fork down. "Funny you say that, because everything you're doing will end there." The room froze. Even the servants stopped moving. My father's eyes flicked toward the chandelier camera. He didn't know that Walter had programmed a separate feed, one that wasn't theirs to delete. I rose from my chair, slowly, heart pounding. "You built this family on appearances," I said. "But appearances don't save you when the world starts watching." My father stood. "Sit down." I didn't. "Or what?" I asked quietly. "You'll show me again what protection looks like." The silence that followed was heavy enough to break. Then in one swift motion, he slapped the table so hard that glasses toppled and shattered. The sound rang like a gunshot. "You don't threaten me," he said, voice trembling for the first time in my life. My mother gasped softly, not out of fear for me, but because the performance had cracked. Charles muttered Jesus under his breath, looking anywhere but at me. I turned and walked away, heels clicking on the marble, echoing the night he pushed me. My body still ached from that fall, but I didn't stumble this time. As I passed the camera by the doorway, the red light blinked once, recording alive, loyal only to truth. Upstairs in my room, I sat on the bed, shaking not from fear, but from adrenaline. For the first time in years, I had spoken without permission, and somewhere deep inside, I could already feel the consequences gathering like thunder. It happened 3 nights after the dinner. The house was quieter than usual, too. Still the kind of stillness that feels like someone holding their breath. Outside, the garden lights threw long silver bars across the marble floor, cutting the hallway into fragments of light and shadow. I was in my room packing a small suitcase. A few closed documents, a flash drive with the recorded files Walter had helped me encrypt. My plan was simple: leave before dawn, drive to Daniel's apartment, and call my lawyer from there. I had texted him earlier, "If I don't show up by morning, check the drive." He replied with only 3 words. "I'm ready, Izzy." When I opened my bedroom door, the scent of my mother's perfume drifted in from the hall. Jasmine, delicate, suffocating. She was standing at the top of the staircase, one hand resting on the rail, a glass of red wine in the other. Leaving, she asked softly, voice like silk wrapping a blade. "I'm going home," I said. "You are home," she murmured. "You don't understand what you're doing. You're hurting your father." I tightened my grip on the suitcase. "He hurt me first." She sighed. He loves you, Isabella. Everything he does for family. Then love shouldn't feel like prison, I said. My father appeared at the bottom of the staircase. No jacket sleeves rolled to his elbows, eyes dark, steady. "You're not going anywhere," he said. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried finality, the same voice he used in boardrooms when declaring acquisitions. "I am," I said, stepping down one stair. "You'll regret this," he warned. "Maybe," I said, "but it'll be my choice." The air between us thickened. My mother whispered, "Richard, please," but he didn't hear her. Or maybe he did and simply didn't care. He began to climb the stairs slowly, one deliberate step at a time. Each footfall echoed through the hall rhythm, steady as a heartbeat. I backed away, holding the suitcase like a shield. "Don't do this," I said. "You'll make me do worse," he replied. When he reached the top, the silence broke all at once. He grabbed my arm, yanking me forward with strength I didn't know he still possessed. The suitcase fell open-closed, spilling across the floor. "You're not walking away from this family," he hissed. "You'll crawl back before I'm done with you." I twisted, trying to break free, but his grip was iron. Pain shot through my shoulder. "Let me go," I shouted. My mother cried out, "Richard, stop!" but her words dissolved into the sound of struggle. Then came the shove, violent, sudden, absolute. The world flipped. My feet lost the ground. I remember the chandelier spinning the marble, blurring the crack of bone as my side hit the step. The breath flew out of me. For a moment, everything went white. Then sound returned, a glass shattering, my mother screaming, my father's voice shouting my name like a curse. I rolled onto my back, gasping. The stairs beneath me were slick with something warm. My ribs throbbed, pain sharp and electric. Above me, my father froze, chest-heaving realization dawning in his eyes. Not guilt fear, because behind him, near the chandelier, the camera light was blinking red. Recording, always recording. I saw him glance up, saw his face shift from rage to calculation. My mother whispered, "The cameras, Richard, the cameras." He didn't answer. He just stared down at me, his breathing rough, his voice low. "You'll ruin us," he said. "No," I managed to whisper. "You did that yourself." Footsteps thundered down the hall, Charles, still half drunk, stumbling into view. "What the hell happened?" he slurred. My mother grabbed his arm. "Help me move her," but I was already pushing myself up, pain screaming through every nerve. "Don't touch me," I said. My voice sounded foreign, hoarse, but steady. "Call an ambulance," Charles muttered, looking lost. "No," my father snapped. "We'll handle this privately." Privately. That word again. The Ward family's favorite coffin for truth. I lay back against the cold marble, watching their silhouettes blur under the chandelier's light. My father's hand shook when he reached for the wine glass my mother had dropped. He hurled it against the wall, shards scattering like rain. "This never happened," he said. My mother nodded quickly, eyes wide, trembling. Charles stared between them, speechless. And then I did the one thing none of them expected. I laughed, a raw, broken laugh that tasted of blood and defiance. "It's all there," I said, pointing toward the blinking camera. "Every word, every hit, every lie." My father turned pale. "You wouldn't. You should have learned by now. I said I don't follow your rules anymore." His mouth opened, but no sound came. He looked smaller suddenly, like a man stripped of his costume. The marble beneath me felt cold, but the fear was gone. I reached for my phone. It was cracked, but the red light confirmed the upload was still in progress. Somewhere far from this house, the truth was being saved. When the sirens finally came, it wasn't because they called them. It was Daniel. He had broken through the gate. His voice filled the hall, shouting my name. As my father stepped back into the shadows, I realized that his empire wasn't built on money, it was built on silence. And tonight, silence had broken. When I woke, the world smelled of antiseptic and iron. A thin light cut through the blinds, pale and merciless. My ribs screamed every time I breathed, a symphony of sharp reminders that pain could be proof of survival. The monitor beside me beeped in a slow rhythm, steady like a second heartbeat. For a few seconds, I didn't remember where I was. Then I saw the bruise on my wrist, the faint imprint of fingers, and everything came back in a rush. The stares, the camera, the laughter that turned into screaming. I tried to sit up, but a nurse's hand stopped me gently. "Easy, Ms. Ward," she said. "You had a nasty fall." Fall. That word. The lie already had legs. "Who told you that I asked?" She hesitated. "Your parents said you tripped at home." I stared at the ceiling, a hollow laugh escaping me. "Of course they did." Her eyes softened. "Your fiancé's in the waiting room. He hasn't left all night." My throat tightened. "Daniel." She nodded. When he walked in, he looked like he hadn't slept in days, eyes red, jaw clenched, clothes still wrinkled from the night before. The moment our eyes met, he exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for hours. "Izzy," he whispered, gripping my hand. "You're safe now." I wanted to believe him. "He said I fell," I murmured. Daniel's face hardened. The cops believed it until they saw the footage. My pulse quickened. "The footage—" He nodded. "Walter's backup drive. The camera feed uploaded before it was wiped. It's all there, everything. The shove, the threats, even your mother's voice begging him to stop." For a moment, silence filled the room, thick and trembling. Relief and terror collided inside me. "Where is it now?" I asked. "With the police," he said. "They've opened an investigation. The officer in charge said they'll need your statement once you're stable." Stable! That word sounded almost cruel. I wasn't stable. I was shattered, but I was awake, and that was enough. Later that afternoon, a detective came in, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a calm, steady presence. "Ms. Ward," she said, pulling up a chair. "We've reviewed the footage your partner gave us. It's clear there was an assault." I nodded slowly. "He's my father," I said. "He's also a man who believes he's untouchable." The detective's lips pressed together. "No one's untouchable when there's video." That night, when the nurses dimmed the lights, I lay awake listening to the rhythmic beep of the monitor, the sound of machines keeping me tethered to the living. Pain moved through my body like a tide, but underneath it was something stronger, a current of quiet fury. I thought about every moment my father had rewritten truth, every time my mother had smiled while erasing me. They had turned gaslighting into an art form, but this time the story wasn't theirs to tell. Daniel came back in just before midnight holding 2 cups of vending machine coffee. He sat beside me, his hand covering mine. "You don't have to go through this alone," he said softly. I turned my head toward him. "I know," I said, voice barely a whisper, "but I have to finish it." He nodded slowly. "Then we'll finish it together." I looked out the window, the city lights flickering like distant stars. Somewhere out there, my father was sitting in his mansion, convinced he could still control the narrative. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of his silence. The truth had found its voice, and it was mine. The news broke 2 days later. Virginia business magnate under investigation for domestic assault. My father's face flashed across the television screen in the hospital lobby expression, composed tie, perfectly knotted, as if he were attending another board meeting instead of fighting for his reputation. The anchors spoke in polite tones, careful to say, alleged, careful not to offend power. My mother stood beside him during the press conference. Pearl's immaculate eyes, red but dry. "My husband is a devoted man," she told the cameras. "This is a family misunderstanding." I almost laughed when I saw it. Even on national television, she couldn't help performing the role that had defined her entire life: the good wife, the loyal mother, the silencer. The detectives came again this time with questions that sliced deep. Every detail mattered: the angle of the stairs, the force of the shove, the words exchanged. I told them everything word for word, and when I finished, the room felt lighter. The officer closed her notebook. "The footage supports your statement. There's also evidence of tampering with the house's security system." "Looks like your father tried to delete the files." I smiled faintly. "He always thought money could erase anything." She nodded. "Not this time." That night, Daniel drove me home, not to the mansion, but to a small apartment he'd rented in Richmond. The air smelled of paint and fresh coffee. There were boxes everywhere, unpacked and waiting, but for the first time in years, I felt safe. He left me in the living room with a blanket and whispered, "Rest. Tomorrow's going to be loud." He was right. By morning, the world had teeth. Reporters camped outside the courthouse. Journalists dug into the Ward family's finances, uncovering patterns of intimidation NDAs and suspicious settlements. Former employees started talking. My father's law firm released a statement calling me unstable. My mother sent a message through a family friend, "Stop this before it destroys everyone." But I'd spent my whole life being destroyed quietly. I wasn't stopping. With Walter's help, I compiled everything: the original audio clips from past conversations and the emails my father sent threatening to cut me off. We arranged a meeting with the prosecutors. They watched the footage in silence, their expressions hardening with every frame. When the video ended, the room was silent. The lead attorney leaned forward. "We'll file charges for aggravated assault, coercion, and obstruction." That night, I called my mother. She answered after the third ring. "You're ruining him," she said, voice trembling. "You're ruining this family." I closed my eyes. "He already ruined it, Mom. You just helped him hide the wreckage." "You don't understand," she whispered. "We can fix this quietly." "Quiet is how he wins," I said. "Not anymore." She didn't reply. I heard her breathing small and uneven before the line went dead. The next morning, I received an email from my father's attorney. A settlement offer. $2 million, the same number as the deal I refused if I withdrew the charges and signed an NDA. The irony almost made me laugh. I typed one sentence in reply: "My silence is no longer for sale." By the end of the week, subpoenas had been issued. The empire began to fracture. The board of Ward Holdings called an emergency meeting. Investors fled. His reputation, once untouchable, was now radioactive. Daniel kept me grounded through the chaos, reminding me to eat, to breathe, to sleep. But inside, I felt something strange calm. Not the kind of calm that comes from peace, but the kind that comes when a war finally makes sense. Every night, I replayed the footage once more, not to relive the pain, but to remind myself why I was fighting. The blinking red light, the fall, the blood, it wasn't horror anymore. It was evidence. Proof that silence could be broken, that control could fail. And somewhere between exhaustion and clarity, I realized something powerful. I wasn't just exposing my father. I was exposing a system that thrived on obedience. The war of silence wasn't between me and him anymore. It was between truth and everything that feared it. The courthouse smelled like paper coffee and nerves. Reporters swarmed the front steps, microphones poised, their voices blending into a single restless hum. Cameras flashed as I walked through the entrance with Daniel at my side. My ribs still sore under the tailored navy suit I borrowed from my lawyer's assistant. Inside, the marble floors gleamed under fluorescent light, too clean, too polished, like everything my father ever loved. The courtroom was crowded: journalists, old business associates, even neighbors pretending to attend for moral support. But their eyes gleamed with hunger. They weren't here for justice. They were here for spectacle. My father sat at the defense table, immaculate as ever. The dark suit, the tie perfectly aligned, the posture regal. Only the faint tremor in his hand betrayed him. My mother sat behind him, pearls on again, eyes cast downward, as though she were attending a funeral. Maybe she was. When he turned and saw me enter, his expression didn't falter. It was the same mask he'd worn my entire life, the look of a man who believed he'd already won. The judge entered, a woman with a calm face and sharp eyes. "People of the Commonwealth versus Richard Ward," she began. "Charges: aggravated assault, coercion, obstruction of justice." My father's lawyer, an older man with a voice made of honey and venom, rose immediately. "Your Honor, my client maintains that this is a tragic misunderstanding, an accident within a private residence blown out of proportion by the media." My lawyer, Evelyn Price, stood next. She was small, precise, the kind of woman who could turn politeness into a weapon. "Your Honor," she said, "the evidence will show this was no accident. It was an act of control, a pattern of manipulation culminating in violence and a family empire built on fear." When the first video played, the courtroom went silent. The image flickered to life on the large monitor, me at the top of the stairs, my father below, my mother watching from the shadows. Then the shove, the thud, the silence that followed. My own scream echoed faintly through the speakers, followed by my father's voice, low and cold. "You'll crawl back before I'm done with you." The judge's gavel hit once. "Order." The defense attorney stood voice tight. That recording is clearly edited. It isn't, Evelyn interrupted. Metadata confirms an unbroken file, uploaded automatically from a secure server, the same server that documented prior communications threatening my client. She turned to the jury, her voice calm but cutting. You'll see that this wasn't an isolated outburst. It was the climax of a lifetime of control. She played the next clip my father's voice in his office recorded weeks earlier without his knowledge. You'll sign before the wedding. You owe it to this family. My voice responding. You gave me a name, not a future. Every word landed like a hammer. The jurors watched in silence. My father's jaw twitched, his composure cracking for the first time. My mother covered her mouth, but her eyes stayed dry. When it was my turn to testify, the room blurred for a moment. The microphone waited in front of me, cold metal and expectation. Ms. Ward, the prosecutor said gently, please tell the court what happened that night. I inhaled, steady and slow. It wasn't about money, I began. It never was. It was about control. About making sure no one in our family could make a decision without his permission. The deal he offered me was a leash. When I said no, he decided punishment was the only language I'd understand. My voice trembled, but I didn't stop. He always said silence kept us safe, but silence only kept him powerful. The courtroom was so still I could hear my heartbeat. I looked at my mother, and for the first time she looked back. Her lips parted slightly as if she wanted to say something, but no sound came. My father's lawyer muttered objections the judge overruled. When Evelyn finished her closing statement, she turned to me, her tone low, steady. Sometimes, she said, truth isn't loud. It's quiet. It's patient. It waits for the moment no one can deny it anymore. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. I spent those hours sitting outside with Daniel, watching leaves drift across the courthouse lawn. I wasn't afraid of the verdict. Whatever it was, I'd already won the one thing they could never take back myself. When the bailiff called us in, the air felt charged. The foreman stood paper trembling in his hands. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all counts. A gasp rippled through the room. My father didn't move. My mother's pearls trembled against her collarbone. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the judge's voice cut through the silence. Mr. Ward, you are remanded to custody pending sentencing. He turned his head toward me, eyes hollow, disbelieving. The same man who built empires with words now had nothing left to say. And for the first time in my life, I didn't look away. The following weeks unfolded like the slow decay of a monument. Ward Holdings, once a name whispered with reverence in every Richmond boardroom, started to crumble from within. The stock value dropped overnight after the guilty verdict. Clients withdrew, partnerships dissolved, and the board announced an emergency restructuring. For the first time in 30 years, my father's office door remained closed, not because of power, but because it had been sealed by investigators. The news channels played endless loops of his courtroom footage, his hand shaking, his voice breaking as he said the word misunderstanding. But the world had already decided. His reputation, once untouchable, was now a cautionary tale about how silence protects monsters. Reporters chased every ex-employee, every former partner. Whispers of intimidation, NDAs, even stories of interns forced to sign morality contracts surfaced. My mother retreated into the mansion like a ghost haunting her own life. She didn't attend the sentencing. She didn't answer calls. One afternoon, I received a small envelope in the mail, no return address, just her handwriting. Inside was a single line written in that same perfect cursive. You were right about everything. I just wasn't brave enough. I read it once, twice, and then folded it carefully into my journal. Charles vanished from the public eye, but word spread he had checked into a rehabilitation center in Maryland. Maybe he was finally confronting his own ghosts. Maybe he was hiding from them. I didn't ask. Some stories had to unravel on their own. The sentencing hearing was short. My father, the man who once believed the law was something he could purchase, stood in an orange jumpsuit, thinner, older, stripped of every illusion. The judge's voice was steady. 10 years for aggravated assault, obstruction, and coercion. No parole for the first 5. When the gavel came down, a single thought crossed my mind. Not triumph, not revenge, just an unfamiliar quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't hide pain, but peace. After the hearing, reporters surrounded me again, cameras flashing, questions flying like bullets. Ms. Ward, do you feel justice was served? Do you regret exposing your father? I met their eyes and said simply, "Justice isn't about regret. It's about ending what should have never begun." Then I walked past them out into the cold Virginia air where Daniel waited by the car. The wind smelled different that day, clearer, lighter. Maybe it was just me breathing without permission for the first time. The empire my father built was gone, but so was the weight it had placed on my chest. I had lost a family but gained something more powerful truth that didn't need permission to exist. That evening, Daniel and I sat on our porch watching the last light fade across the city skyline. "It's over," he said quietly. I nodded. "No," I whispered. "It's just beginning." He looked at me puzzled until I added, "For years my father taught people that silence was loyalty. I'm going to teach them it's surrender." The next morning, I filed the paperwork to dissolve my inheritance rights. Every penny I could have claimed from Ward Holdings went into a trust under a new name, the Ward Foundation for Women's Recovery. It would fund shelters, legal aid, and crisis counseling for women who had nowhere else to go. By the end of the month, the media had moved on to newer scandals. But sometimes when I passed by the courthouse or saw my last name in the archives, I'd remember his words, "You'll crawl back before I'm done with you." He was wrong. I did not crawl. I stood and I never went back. Freedom, I learned, doesn't come with applause. It comes with silence, the kind that no longer suffocates, the kind that lets you breathe without asking permission. After the trial, I moved into a small cottage on the outskirts of Richmond, surrounded by oak trees and a lake that mirrored the sky. The first morning there, I woke to the sound of birds instead of marble footsteps. For the first time in my adult life, I made coffee without wondering if anyone would judge how I stirred it. It sounds small, but to me, it was sacred. Daniel helped me settle in, though he knew when to give me space. "You don't have to rush into anything," he said one evening as we unpacked boxes. "Healing takes its own clock." He was right. For weeks, I drifted between exhaustion and restlessness. I kept replaying everything: his voice the fall, the trial, the look on my mother's face when she finally broke her silence. I wasn't haunted. I was remembering so I wouldn't forget who I used to be. The foundation began quietly. Walter handled the tech side, setting up secure digital platforms for women to store evidence safely. Videos, voice recordings, messages, things they were too scared to keep at home. Daniel helped me find the building downtown, a renovated warehouse with wide windows and light that spilled in like mercy. I named it the Ward Center, not as a monument to my family, but as a reclamation of the name that had once controlled me. Now it would protect others. The first woman who came through our doors was a nurse from Norfolk, shaking eyes wide with fear. Her husband had been erasing her phone messages and threatening to handle things privately. As she spoke, I felt an echo of my younger self sitting across the table. I told her what I wish someone had told me years ago. "You're not crazy, you're not dramatic, you're surviving." Every story that entered the center carried its own weight. Some ended in escape, others in heartbreak, but each one built something inside me, resilience layered over scar tissue. I wasn't just healing, I was rebuilding, not into who I was before, but into someone who understood that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers steady and unbreakable. One afternoon, I received a letter from the prison. The handwriting was unmistakable. My father. For a moment, I considered tearing it up, but curiosity won. The letter was short. "You've destroyed everything we built. I hope you're proud." I read it twice, then placed it back into the envelope without anger. For the first time, his words didn't have power. He was right about one thing, though: I had destroyed what he built, and I was proud. A few months later, I visited my mother. She looked older, smaller, her hair streaked with silver. We sat in the same dining room where everything had once fallen apart. She didn't apologize outright. She wasn't capable of that, but she said quietly, "You were brave." I wasn't. I reached for her hand. "You still can be," I said. For the first time, she didn't pull away. That night, as I drove home, the road shimmered under the headlights. I rolled down the window, letting the cool air sting my face. I realized then that healing isn't a destination, it's a choice, made again and again. Every sunrise, every breath, every small act of defiance. I had spent my whole life trying to earn love through obedience. Now, I was learning how to live without permission. A year after the trial, I stood on a small stage at the opening ceremony of the Ward Center. The crowd wasn't large, mostly women volunteers, a few journalists, but the air felt charged with something sacred. Behind me, sunlight poured through the glass windows, illuminating the words engraved on the entrance wall. Truth has no inheritance, it belongs to the brave. As I spoke, I saw faces of every age, women clutching hands, daughters standing beside mothers, even a few men listening quietly in the back. When I was younger, I said I thought strength meant silence. I thought family meant control. I thought love meant obedience. But I was wrong. Strength is what happens when you decide that fear no longer gets the final word. The audience was quiet, but I saw tears glinting in the light. If you've ever been told you're too emotional, too dramatic, too much, remember, that's what people say when they're afraid of your truth. After the ceremony, a woman about my mother's age approached me. She had soft gray eyes and a bruise fading along her jawline. "I watched your case," she said. "I never thought I'd have the courage to leave my husband. But then I saw you stand in that courtroom." Her voice broke slightly. I realized silence was killing me faster than his temper. I took her hands. "You don't need to be fearless," I said. "You just need to be done being afraid." She nodded, and in that moment, I understood something no verdict or foundation could ever teach me. Change doesn't happen in grand gestures. It begins in whispers, in small choices made by people who decide to stop hiding. That night, after everyone left, I stayed alone in the building. The city lights shimmered through the windows, and somewhere in the distance, a train horn cried out a low, steady sound that somehow felt like closure. I thought of my father in his cell of my mother, sitting in her empty house of all the women still trapped in invisible prisons built from love and fear. I didn't hate them anymore. Hate was another kind of chain, and I was done carrying it. Daniel came in quietly, setting a cup of coffee beside me. "You did it," he said. I smiled. "We did it." He looked around at the quiet building, at the walls lined with stories and names of women who had found their voices again. "You turned pain into proof," he said. I looked out at the dark sky and whispered, "No." I turned silence into sound. As we stepped outside, the night air felt cool against my skin. For a long moment, I stood there listening to the world breathe. Every leaf rustle, every distant hum, it all felt like a reminder that life continues even after it's been broken. Especially after. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: justice isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with trumpets or applause. It begins quietly in the heart of someone who finally decides enough is enough. My name is Isabella Ward, and I said no to the deal, to the control, to the silence. I thought that night on the stairs would be my ending, but it wasn't. It was the beginning of something greater, proof that even the smallest act of defiance can echo loud enough to rebuild an entire life. And if you're listening, maybe it can rebuild yours too.